Yeah, a few heads of state making the trip to Hamburg for this summit. Not among them was France's president. Relations between France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Friedrich Merz have been, of late, a bit, how should we put it, chaotic, I'd say. Jeanette Süß is with us, researcher for the Committee for the Study of Franco-German Relations at the French Institute of International Relations. Ifri, you've just published a study on how Germany makes its European policy. There you see it. I said chaotic. Maybe it's not chaotic. Let's just say it's not the bromance we expected. And in the face last week of superpower pressures from Russia, but also from the United States, other Europeans are worried. They want the Germans and the French to get along better. What are the points of discord here?
So first of all, I would say that we are in this time, in this phase of the relationship, maybe where the relationship is put to a test, whereas in the beginning, 1 year ago, there was this bromance, this narrative about that, very symbolic, of course, first meetings between Macron and Merz. But now, as things are materializing, and we have to put it down, to break it down to different aspects, be it in the economic field, in the trade field, in the defense sector, the cooperation, it's becoming more difficult because it's becoming concrete. But there's always been divergences, structural divergences between France and Germany. So we have a very big divergence in the trade sector, where Germany advocates for free trade deals all over the world, and France is a bit more reluctant and a bit more protectionist, you could also say, from a German viewpoint. Then you have the defense cooperation, but we also do have some leeway when it comes to, for example, the cooperation in the energy sector. So there is also some positive signs and also some common measures that are announced for more EU competitiveness.
All right, so let's break down the first two, because again, this is all about Europe building up its self-reliance in the face of a U.S. ally that is not as reliable to them as it once was. Mm-hmm. On trade, the difference over Mercosur, is that surmountable?
I mean, anyway, the deal was adopted at the end in the Council of Ministers, and France was bypassed by the other member states. This was, of course, a tough situation between France and Germany, because Germany was hoping to be able to convince France by giving in and by giving some compromises, by giving in to the concerns that they had for the farmers especially, and the demonstrations that were going on. So there's of course a political pressure on the domestic side here, but Germany didn't really convince Macron at the end. They had to give in to this political pressure. But there's other situations where we can see that both states are still pretty much aligned. So when it comes to Donald Trump, they were both in favor of having a clear stance towards the US, for example.
But Germany still has this export-driven model,
yes,
which the French don't have. So is that something that's insurmountable?
And that's why it's easier for Germany to conclude these free trade agreements, whereas for France, it's a bit a different story. But I think France is really worried about this agricultural sector, and Germany has other type of industries, especially the automotive industry, very export-driven. So it has a hard time saying it doesn't want to, it wants to stop exporting. It really wants to continue exporting all over the world, of course.
And then there's defense, where the arguments run twofold. There's whether each side accuses the other of not leveling up enough. The French not spending enough, are accused of not spending enough on Ukraine. Mm-hmm. The Germans accused of not spending enough, period. And the two don't get along when it comes to, for instance, plans to build weaponry together.
Yeah, on the one hand, we can see that there is pretty much of an alignment when it comes to the rhetorical side. So there is this what Macron already said, a strategic autonomy discourse going on since 2017. And Germany didn't really apply back in the day under Merkel or Scholz. And now Friedrich Merz, he really welcomes this concept. So he's also in favor of producing more European-based weapon systems as such. But when it comes to the concrete projects between France and Germany, so the FCAS, the fighter jet, future combat air system especially, and then we have the MGCS, the main ground combat system.
Are both those projects dead?
They're not dead. The tank project is a bit more reliable. However, for the FCAS, the Future Combat Air System, there is a very like a hard competition going on between Dassault and
some people are saying Europe is facing an existential crisis, and that the last week, the threats against Greenland, what's happening in Ukraine, are existential crises, and they feel as though they don't understand why the French and the Germans aren't getting along.
There's definitely a sense of urgency, I feel. However, there is this competition going on, especially between Dassault on the one hand and Airbus on the other hand. Then there's also the Spanish side, in the Spanish part inside. So it's all a question about technological leadership. France worried about losing its leadership, about losing its intellectual property, and Germany having rather like a stance of wanting to share knowledge, to work together collaboratively, but at the end just giving money without having necessarily the savoir-faire. So that's
last Friday,
argument.
Friedrich Merz goes to Rome, sees Giorgia Meloni, the far-right head of a coalition government, and there extols that they can get along together, they can help to simplify Europe. The message was kind of like, is this the new motor for the EU, or is France sidelined? Or what did you make of this Friday visit to Rome?
I think it's rather complementary because what we have to put into context is, and what we have to remember is that there has been a dialogue going on already under the previous German government, under Olaf Scholz. In 2023, Italy and Germany signed a bilateral agreement for an action plan. And now this is really an update of this action plan by materializing it into concrete projects which are developed further. So of course, Italy and Germany have a lot of things in common. They are major industrial powers within the EU. So sometimes it's a bit easier maybe to collaborate in terms of industrial culture, but it can't replace the Franco-German
So is the beating heart of the EU shifting from a Paris-Berlin axis to a Berlin-Rome axis?
I wouldn't say that, because we also have other actors within the EU, and we're seeing rather a multiplication of different forms, different flexible formats within the EU. So it's rather unilateral partners like the Weimar Triangle, Weimar Plus, and we have Ifri with the UK also, super important in the defense cooperation. And then we have France and Italy now becoming important players, of course, because Merz, he also knows that the time frame to shape European policy with Macron is quite limited, as there will be presidential elections taking place in 2027.
How about ordinary Germans? Do they prefer to do business with the Italians than with the French?
There is a very narrow business relationships between Italy and Germany.
Even though there's this kind of Republican firewall in Germany that you have like in France, and Meloni is from the far right.
That's true, and that's something that is criticized also by the coalition partner, the Social Democrats, within the German government, that Merz shouldn't team up too much with Meloni and the ECR, the European Conservative and Reformist Party within the European Parliament. And on the other hand, these are ad hoc coalitions, so there's not a systematic collaboration going on between these political families.
Getting back to Paris and Berlin, would you say the relationship is in crisis right now?
No, definitely not. There has always been divergences. What we can see is definitely an improved relationship in the sense that it's way more regular, that Paris and Berlin talk to each other, and there is a Franco-German roadmap that dates back to August 2025. The problem is that there has been so many government reshuffles that both governments had a hard time implementing what they have been announced in this Franco-German roadmap, especially focusing on EU competitiveness.
Because Emmanuel Macron seemed like the strong one next to Olaf Scholz with the weaknesses, the coalition issues that he had. Now with the French government's falling consistently, with Macron being term limited and leaving office, is the French the weaker link in this case?
There is kind of a power shift that we can sense to a certain extent. However, I would say that Macron still keeps a certain momentum and keeps his power when it comes to steering foreign policy, as he has a very vocal stance and very important role, also constitutionally speaking, as being the French president, which is not so much the case for a German chancellor in terms of, position and possibilities. So there is still this prominent role of Macron. However, of course, there is a lack of credibility when it comes to other when it comes to other policy domains, especially the interior affairs of France.
All right, Jeanette Süß, so many thanks for joining us here on France.
Thanks for having me.
Stay with us. There's more to come, more news, plus the day's business and sports.